In the deep and dark corners of history, where the shadow of death makes its invisible way, lies a chapter shrouded in darkness and horror, whose repercussions echo through the ages. This is the story of the bubonic plague in America, a forgotten chapter that will change the way you think about humanity's struggle for survival. In an era when the world seemed limitless and full of promise, an unseen enemy invaded the lives of many without warning, leaving a trail of destruction and fear in its wake. How did this ancient horror find its way to a new continent? What heroic efforts were made to stop its spread? And what does it mean for us today? The first plague epidemic in the Americas occurred in the 18th century, specifically in 1900. This plague epidemic occurred in San Francisco, California, and was caused by flea plague. At the time, it was a major port city, and merchant ships were arriving from all over the world, including those with known cases of the plague. A little about the plague. Flea plague is a form of disease transmitted through the bites of infected fleas, which usually live on rats. Rats, in turn, were common in harbor areas. Since San Francisco was a major port with heavy maritime traffic, this contributed to the spread of the disease. The first one happened in the 5th and 8th centuries, the so-called Justinian's plague, which halved the population of Byzantium. The second was the same Black Death that devastated medieval Europe. The third global epidemic began relatively recently, around 1885, in China's Yunnan province. Globalization, steamships, and migration then allowed the plague to spread to all inhabited continents in a matter of years. Just a few years after the outbreak in China, it was already raging in India and Hawaii. At that time, they did not belong to the USA yet. And in 1900, it reached America. The first plague-infected people reached the States 9 months before the outbreak. They were 2 Japanese men who had snuck onto the steamship Nippon Harry from Hong Kong and jumped overboard, hoping to swim to shore. A few days later, their bodies with signs of disease were fished out near Angel Island in San Francisco Bay. However, the 2 men did not cause the epidemic. American health officials knew what was happening in China and kept all those who came from Asia under strict quarantine. What they did not know was that the plague was spread by fleas and rats that came on steamships. On March 6, 1900, the year of the rat, the first plague victim was found in San Francisco itself. He was a 41-year-old woodworking shop owner named Wing Chu Kin, a native of China who had been living in San Francisco for 16 years. He was a bachelor and lived in a semi-basement off the red light district. So all the while he was suffering from the plague, local doctors, who thought he simply had gonorrhea, treated him incorrectly, to say the least. The suspicious corpse brought to the police station was seen by the state surgeon, and he conducted an autopsy, which finally convinced him that he was a victim of the plague. The city's medical officers sounded the alarm. Responsible for the health of the inhabitants of San Francisco, Dr. Joseph Kenyon conducted a huge work to isolate pockets of infection. He persuaded the city authorities to declare a quarantine in Chinatown, and even begged them to spend part of the budget on advanced plague vaccines, which were invented by Russian doctor Voldemar Kovkin. The vaccines already existed in prototype form in 1897 and managed to save Bombay from disaster. But the San Francisco authorities considered them an untested remedy and a waste of money. Joseph Kenyon, and soon the newspapers and medical circles began to poison Kenyon himself. The fact is that in 1900, 16% of the city's entire population and 90% of the labor force building the Transcontinental Railroad were Chinese. Quarantining Chinatown, then home to 250,000 people, would have resulted in huge losses for industrialists and businessmen. An anti-plague campaign was organized, and Joseph Kenyon was accused of spreading false rumors for profit. California Governor Henry Gage personally made the announcement that there had never been and would never be a plague in his state. The anti-plague bravado went so far that San Francisco actually disbanded its medical staff. Allegedly, budget money is wasted on these alarmists. It all sounds crazy, but at that time there was an absurd racist stereotype, according to which whites, as stronger and more spiritually developed people, do not get sick with shameful diseases of Asians, like plague. As you can see, spiritually advanced people did not burden themselves with the memory of the Black Death, which killed 25 million people in the Middle Ages. A year later, about 100 people died of bubonic plague in Chinatown. Virtually no action was taken on this matter. After all, the governor had issued a decree that plague does not happen in California. Fortunately, San Francisco doctors did not sit idle and tried to reach the highest authorities. In the end, they reached President McKinley, and only with his submission began to apply measures to combat the epidemic. In place of slandered and almost driven to suicide, Joseph Kinyon in San Francisco sent an energetic military Dr. Rupert Blue, whose efforts and managed to defeat the plague. Rupert Blue took up the cause with an army fervor. Chinatown was once again quarantined. Suspicious shops, inns, brothels, and other suspicious places of congregation where there might be rats were closed. The earth floors of buildings were filled with concrete, and concrete and stone floors were treated with lye. A rat hunt began in the neighborhood. Rodents were investigated, tracking the spread of the plague through neighborhoods. Neighborhoods invaded by plague rats were additionally cordoned off, creating a kind of quarantine within a quarantine. Thanks to all these measures, the outbreak of bubonic plague was localized, and soon it came to naught. However, the city was declared free of the disease only in 1908. However, cases of infection are noted in the United States to this day. Rats that arrived on steamships from China infected autochthonous gophers. Even in 2016 and 2017 in New Mexico, there were cases of infection. Several people were infected. One of them even died. So definitively, the plague that began with Wing Chun Kin has never been defeated. San Francisco vivisectors study rats for infection. The San Francisco epidemics are thus a perfect example of how the greed of corrupt officials, the incompetence of politicians, and a corrupt media can contribute to the development of a pandemic. It is a reminder that there is no room for complacency in the fight against infectious diseases. Our response to such threats must be based on the lessons of the past, scientific progress, and collective efforts. Only in this way can we hope to leave epidemics of plague and other diseases in history rather than in our future. Like it, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell. See you later.